I'm going to air some dirty laundry here. We had a couple of projects in New York City that had actually been approved and permitted with cross-laminated timber. And as we were beginning the shop drawing process, the authorities rescinded that. And we were left with the choice of either letting the project go and allowing someone else to do it, or working with the client and building a nail laminated timber solution.
Hey everyone, it's time for Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top professionals in real estate design, development, and construction. I'm your host, Rens Hayes, founding partner H&O, lifelong learner, obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time on the show, thank you so much for tuning in, and if you're a returning guest, can't thank you enough. Let's get to the show. Mass timber, sustainable construction, reducing our carbon footprint. Those are the hot topics, and you are one of the visible, outspoken leaders of Nordic Structures. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and Nordic Structures today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the business development manager for Nordic Structures. I started in the business kind of by mistake. This was actually the format that I wanted to be in. I had a radio show in college, and I wanted to continue my studies in communication, and needed to earn some money to pay that tuition. And the first place I interviewed at was a lumber company. And
unbelievable. You do great in that role.
Well, thank you. I had my call sign all picked out. I had a location for my radio station. Everything was planned, and it just, when I hit the lumber business, it all kind of went sideways. So, like Michael Corleone, every time I tried to get out, they dragged me back in.
It could be an avenue for you in business development in the lumber industry.
Yeah, actually, and my last name Dubois actually is kind of prophetic, right? It means of wood. So. Yeah, and it's genetic as well. My grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad, on weekends when he was trying to raise a family on a military budget, he'd go out and build houses. So it definitely was not far. The acorn didn't fall far from the tree.
That's too funny. So you almost went into radio, and then the lumber industry sucked you in. So tell us a little bit about your kind of place in the lumber industry and then Nordic Structures.
Yeah, actually, I was pretty fortunate. I started in the business on the brokerage side, so I was working with basically wholesalers, and got a really good introduction to the variety of manufacturing, locations, logistics. I was actually a logistics specialist over time for the company that I was working with, and so I didn't really get to sell until 4 or 5 years into my career. And I had to earn that right. So there's always been a real sense of humility when someone grants me an order. I understand all the things that go into working a sale and being part of a solution, and really that's kind of the path that Nordic has taken. Right, as a business, we're vertically integrated. Nordic Structures has 10 million acres of forest land that we harvest in northern Quebec. It's all boreal forest, and it's in a microclimate that's pretty severe, so we get very, very small trees that grow over extended periods of time with an 80 to 120-year life cycle. So,
that's unbelievable. So I looked this up. How many million acres is this forest?
10 million.
10 million acres. No, I couldn't even conceptualize that amount of area in so I plugged in and I tried to figure out how many acres is Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and then Connecticut. So the area of forest that you are harvesting is almost the size of all 3 of those states combined. I think the 3 of those states is just over 10 million acres. So from a land area, that is such a large area.
Yeah, and we're managing this over time, and it's not just saying that we've got this contiguous land, because it's not all contiguous, right? So we have areas that go off to the east and the northeast, and more to the west. But most of that is land that is untouched, and we actually have to develop the forest roads to be able to go in and manage that and do the extraction, the harvesting.
You mean they're not paved roads for access into?
No, actually, I think Chibougamau is, if you're driving on paved road in Quebec, the point where it turns around and comes back before it turns into gravel roads is Chibougamau. So, if you go far enough north, you're going to end up where we are. But after that, it's gravel roads, and you're going to be looking to the large hydro projects and the mining industry. So, big commercial trucking, not over the road trucking.
And so Nordic, they built their first mass timber production plant in 2010. When was Nordic Structures actually founded?
Well, Nordic is a division of Chantier Chibougamau, a 61-year-old, 62-year-old company now. So it has very humble beginnings. It started manufacturing mining timbers for the local industry back in the early 60s. And over time, we got further afield from what we call the large trees, something that might be up to 12 inches in diameter. We're getting further and further.
12 inches in diameter is a large tree up there, you're saying?
Yeah, actually, the wood that we harvest averages 4.5 inches in diameter, tip to butt. So it's a very, very meager resource, and so that speaks to how our company evolved and what we do, and the evolution from a sawmill to today, where we're manufacturing large volumes of mass timber and engineered wood. So as we got away from that larger forest, it became apparent that we couldn't just make dimensional lumber and random length lumber, and we constantly refined our processes to be more efficient. And so we became a stud mill, exclusively making 2x3 and 2x4, because obviously you can't make a 2x6 out of 4.5 inch wood. And we started checking into higher technology for secondary transformation, and we began finger jointing in the late 1980s, early 90s, and making finger joint stud, thinking that we would be able to capture margin on that. There's always that transborder duty issue that is at issue. You've got to you're competing to get into market share.
I imagine as a wood supplier that can only produce 2x3s and 2x4 studs, you really need to build some industry partnerships and alliances, right? Because are you distributing through other wood manufacturers and suppliers?
No, actually our market at that point is going to be through the wholesale distribution chain that's going to be dedicated primarily to either secondary industrial transformation like box springs, bedding, furring strips, and then the conventional home building market, right? So single family home manufacturers. And that's a business that's very well established through retail lumber yards. There's not a lot of direct mill sales to home builders. No. And so we have a real two-step distribution process that we engage in. So it was from there that we, as we evolved from a vertically oriented finger joint where it's compressive strength only is required, we began looking into the technology that allowed us to create tension lam stock. And in the 1990s, we started making tension lam, and we were actually manufacturing I-joists at that point for a couple of other large multinationals. And Nordic decided at that time to begin making our own market with I-joists, and that's where the name Nordic Structures came about. It was actually Nordic Engineered Wood at the time. We've since evolved beyond engineered wood to making mass timber, and so that's where the Nordic Structures name came. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. And today's service from Nordic, you guys are really an integrated. You have engineering teams. You're harvesting the actual lumber from this forest. You're bringing it in through your mill, and you're delivering a fabricated product, right? So could you tell people, I guess, if you were to explain the elevator pitch of your services today, how would you say it?
Yep. Well, I think you hit on all the key topics. We're vertically integrated, so we do everything from planting the seeds in the areas that we're harvesting to extracting wood from the forest, sawmilling. So we have a very extensive sawmill operation, and over the past 10 years, we've actually acquired another sawmill west of Chibougamau in Landrienne, and from there also a pulp plant. So we've become completely self-sufficient or autonomous in terms of the circular economy of wood, because wood and lumber are actually a byproduct of paper economically, right? So chips dictate the value of the product. Lumber allows us to manufacture all of those, and now we have that entire closed loop. And then from there, from the sawmilling, we do optimization. We have a high level optimization equipment, basically a Gracon system that does machine stress rating. So all of our material is actually graded for fiber bending strength, and black spruce, which makes up the majority of our product, is very highly touted for that type of thing. So it's in high demand for truss manufacturers, I-joist manufacturers, etc. And so we began making glulam to support the I-joist business that we had, because we didn't really have the header stock that allowed us to offer a full mix. And that's when I got involved in developing program sales across the U.S. with likely partners, and building businesses that allowed them a more vertical integration as well, where Nordic was providing a full suite of services. From there in 2010, we began making CLT panels, and Nordic had intended to produce product with the European mentality that we would build panels and the market would design and provide us with the numeric information to be able to optimize that. We put in CNC equipment, but unfortunately the market here in North America didn't have the full scope of services and didn't have the technical expertise to really do that. So we became our own development company and began building
and code was restricting at that point too, right?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you could build Type 5 and you could build Type 4 HT. So you were really limited in what you could develop. We built in a very non-traditional market, condo project, 24 unit mass timber condo in Chibougamau, which is not ideal for developing a system, right, and developing a market. But we did that in order to prove the capacity, and by doing that, we showed an example to the development community at large across Quebec that this was a viable building system, and from there we started developing our business.
Very cool. And your team serves really all of Canada and the U.S. Are those the markets that Nordic serves?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of interesting. We were selling I-joists into Europe at the time. We had a distributor in France. We had clients in the UK. We were selling it to Ireland and England. Obviously, across North America, we were kind of limited logistically to points east of the Mississippi, because there's only so much you can get on a car or a truck and be economically viable. So we have the ability to extract. We were voluntarily restricting ourselves east of the Mississippi because we thought that the same realities for dimension lumber and engineered wood products would hold true for mass timber. And it was kind of ironic that the first big project that we got independently was all the way down to the Gulf Coast, working for the U.S. Army.
Was it really?
Yeah. We built the first U.S. Army hotel that was designed for anti-terrorism blast protection.
Very cool.
At that time, right? So that's a project that the inception came in 2012. It took a couple of years to get it, and we're off and running from there.
That's really cool. And I want to highlight, I really look at Nordic as a bit of a trailblazer in the mass timber world, especially in North America. So for the listeners at home, Jean-Marc mentioned previous to, it's really the IBC International Building Code of 2021, mass timber was really only approved by code to go for type 5 or type 4 construction. Type 5 is essentially a wood frame, it could be a combustible material, so wood frame up to 4 stories tall. And then type 4 HT, which is heavy timber, which mass timber is. It's a heavy timber section that uses a charred fire rating for construction, really was only approved up to 5 stories. And all of that changed in 2021. And that's why we all today are talking about mass timber so much, because we can build a mass timber building up to 18 stories. Now, this is still being widely implemented across the US, but it's such an exciting conversation. And to go back to think that Nordic invested in a CLT manufacturing plant, not a small capital investment, in 2010, far before like this was widely approved at height. And that height allows developers, we can use this at scale to where it's more, mass timber is a comparable product, say in construction for steel and concrete, where it really starts to become price competitive. So could you talk to us a little bit more about how you guys assess like risk and opportunity all the way back in 2010, and did you play a role in the approval of mass timber up to 18 stories in the IBC 2021?
Great question. And yes, absolutely. Nordic Structures, first of all, being a Canadian company, there are really distinctions between U.S. business and Canadian business.
Sure.
And I mean, we're in the same continent. The building codes are very similar. Canadian building code tends to allow more design for intent, as opposed to being based exclusively on prescriptive design. So in the U.S., and I think part of it is just the nature of the overall business. Things can be more litigious here. We're more risk adverse in the U.S., and so everyone's protecting that ability. In Canada, there's a lot of effort to go to proof of concept. And so Nordic Structures, in developing some of the buildings that we did locally, we developed an expertise and worked with code people, housing authorities, and the local fire safety people to develop and provide concept. And it was basically alternate means and methods, right? So we were doing the AMMR. It tends to be less common in the States to go AMMR. They like to go prescriptive. And so our proof of concept is usually going to be predicated on structural evaluation, fire safety performance. It's really an overall design intent to show that we meet the intent of the code or exceed the intent of the code, despite the fact that the code may have been written in a time where these elements didn't exist. And so over time, Nordic built, before the code allowed 6-story buildings, we actually built a 6-story building with the approval of the AHJ. Small ask, and we got that done, and we did that in Quebec. And then from there, we started pushing the limits into 8, 9, and actually 13 stories. And so in order to do...
Even before IBC 2021?
Oh, way before, yeah. We started the concept in 2014. We had we had a site that was looking to be developed that had low compacted soil, high water table, in a seismic zone. And the only way it could pencil out was to build it all in wood, that if you tried to build it with concrete, you would have had to put pilings down so far it never would have been economically viable.
Because a mass timber building is significantly lighter, right?
Exactly. We're looking at, anywhere from, 30 to 50% weight reduction, if not more, depending on how your foundation is. And so we worked with the AHJ in Quebec City. We worked with the community. We worked with the housing authority and the fire department. And we actually conducted a full-scale burn test of a 2-story elevator shaft with an apartment next to it, and exceeded a 2-hour fire rating, and with a very minimal temperature gradient increase from the apartment to there. There were people from the fire services all over Canada that attended that, and it's something that has been documented. So that kind of served as a foundational element, because at that point we actually helped develop a code to build up to 12 stories in wood, which you were saying mass timber is wood, but it is combustible, but it's not light frame. And so the code was really geared to that. With that, our Director of Technical Services, Julie Frappier, was asked to be part of the Tall Wood Building Code Council. And so we actually have people that sit in and help develop that code cycle that is being pushed out now, and allowing us to build up to 18 stories. So we're very intimate with that. We work across Canada and the U.S. with a number of code people. And of course we have our own internal staff of 65 designers, engineers, technicians that help provide the glue that holds those projects together. So we've actually developed a lot of concepts, and we've been quiet about it. We don't have a huge marketing budget, so we don't populate a lot of that. But there's a lot of things that Nordic has done that have been firsts in the industry. So
13-story high-rise ahead of the code approval. Talk to us about, at this point, even with IBC 2021, that building needs to be completely concealed. All the mass timber needs to be concealed in something gyp, something non-combustible material. Were you able to build that pre-code as an exposed mass timber product? So just relying on the charred section of the wood?
Actually, I'll say yes and no. So there's a caveat. We could not build that 13-story and have it exposed, because not only was the gravity loading system all mass timber, but the core was as well. So this is the only all wood building of that height in North America that relies exclusively on wood to provide its lateral.
And that's a 13-story lateral system with CLT shear walls in a
That's
seismic
correct.
region.
That's correct. We actually have some pretty amazing engineers. We came up with a rocking wall system where we have glue laminated columns on either side of CLT that have shear pins that allow the wood to move without tearing the building apart. And it's actually the subject of an upcoming article in the Council for Tall Building and Urban Habitat that should be published later this month, actually.
That's great. I was going to say, I imagine you guys have some content on there, so I'd love to get a link to some images and all that stuff so that we could share it in the show notes so people could see this building. I personally am interested. I want to see it.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and some of the details that we came up with to be able to build that were absolutely amazing. So yeah, a little bit of groundbreaking there. But to get to the next step in your question, during the time that we were planning this building, and the whole code cycle and the dialogue with the authorities, the AHJ, took 18 months. We were actually planning Arbora, which you're a little bit familiar with, 2 8-stories and a 9-story in Montreal, which were still outside the code. And so since we had basically proven the concept and had gotten the approval to build that, even though it was completely clad, we had a small ask for the city of Montreal, and we were allowed to get a portion of that building with exposed wood. And so we have beams and columns in every apartment in that project are exposed.
Very exciting. We love the look. We're going to jump to 11 East Lenox here in a minute. But the new building code, the IBC 2021, allows us to build up to, they say 9 stories, but they put a cap at 85 feet, which really means 8 stories of fully exposed mass timber buildings.
Right.
And then you can go up to 12 with partially exposed, which means like in a residential setting, you might have exposed beams and an underside of, say, a CLT slab in like your living area and your bedrooms, but otherwise it's concealed.
Due to change in 2024.
Due to change. Is that official?
That's official.
Official. So that means we're going to have fully exposed up to 12 stories. Is that right?
That's correct.
Really, really excited. I did not know that was official. So
Breaking news. You heard it here
breaking
first,
news
ladies and
here on
gentlemen.
the Design Development Podcast. What an
Yep.
exciting way to do it.
Yep. I
I
think
was
California
curious.
is actually adopting it in 2020 for the 2021 code.
It's amazing. Really
Which,
exciting. Because
I mean, if
from
you
our
talk,
standpoint, knowing mass timber, like the charred section of a heavy timber and a laminated timber is a very safe building. Like it can resist a fire event. So to the people that have been in the mass timber world is a relief because they know it performs so well on a fire, right? Wrapping and
yeah,
drip was not really necessary up to that height. And that's only going to make it more economical and more appealing to do, right?
absolutely.
That's exciting. I wanted to talk about the decision to go with CLT floor slabs. That's exclusively the type of floor slab that you guys produce, right? At Nordic? Or do you do
Current,
nail laminated and dowel laminated timber as well?
yeah, before we had CLT, obviously we were using glue laminated plank. So that's always a possibility that it could be done. It's just that cross laminated timber offers so many more benefits to that. First and foremost, it's bidirectional, right? So you've got weak axis strength that you can use to do some really amazing things with cross laminated timber that you really couldn't otherwise. That also has the added effect of not requiring a shear diaphragm across the surface, so you're not adding more layers, which can be very expensive, time consuming, etc. I'm going to cough now. I'm sorry.
No problem.
And additionally, it's much more dimensionally stable. So, there was a time when we actually, I'm going to air some dirty laundry here. We had a couple of projects in New York City that had actually been approved and permitted with cross-laminated timber, and as we were beginning the shop drawing process, the authorities rescinded that, which was rather disturbing, and we were left with the choice of either letting the project go and allowing someone else to do it, or working with the client and building a nail laminated timber solution, which we decided to do. So again, as Nordic is very self-sufficient, we ended up creating a nail lam
That's
manufacturing
that's no
plant
easy feat.
at our plant. Right. Well, we had a short time frame to work within, but we also had a significant volume of material that needed done. So we weren't going to just cobble something together on site. So we wanted to do it right. And unfortunately, there were a number of weather delays. The building didn't get enclosed properly in time, and because it doesn't have the stability due to the cross orientation, the elements swelled and started pushing the building out. So we had to revisit that building time after time after time to cut relief cuts in it, and that just indicated to us that
This is not
cross
the right
laminated timber is what we want to focus on. If someone needs another solution, unless if it's going to be a solution that laminated deck makes sense and it's completely internal, and there are projects that we've done where we're doing adaptive reuse, and so we are providing glue lam plank.
Weather exposure is just such a significant risk, like from an
Exactly.
insurance perspective. Like, how do you
Yeah.
overcome that type of event? And you can't
Exactly.
predict. There's going to be a period during shipping or install before it's weather tight that it's going to happen. You're going to get rain, right? So,
Yep.
the CLT is just a better product.
Absolutely.
It's
And
more versatile.
It doesn't move. And black spruce, the species that we have, is also, for good or bad, it's the least impervious of all the species out there. We've had pressure treaters tried to actually pressure treat our product, and the minute you pull a vacuum on it, the cells close. It's completely counterintuitive. But
The black spruce, I want to highlight how you guys have taken advantage of the climate that you're working in northern Canada here. So the black spruce, it's got an 80-year growth cycle. Do you know what the average growth cycle is for a tree? I've heard like over 300 years for say some of the species in the western United States. Is that more normal?
yeah, actually, in the western temperate rainforests along the west coast, you can have Doug fir trees that are over 1,500 years, right?
Yeah,
So that's a very long life cycle. And I'm just going to touch on sustainability and carbon capture, carbon drawdown.
absolutely.
With our trees, as they achieve peak maturity, they basically stop absorbing carbon dioxide from the air. They're not growing anymore, and so basically they just start dying. So you've got a 40-year window, plus or minus, to extract that and encapsulate the carbon in those products. In the temperate rainforests and in the south, in the southern yellow pine growing regions, you can have a tree that might be harvestable in 20 to 30 years. But you can have a tree that, like I said, could have a life cycle of 500 to 1,500 or even 2,000 years. And as they grow bigger, every year, because of their sheer volume, they're actually extracting more carbon as they grow, as opposed to us at peak maturity where we're extracting less and less carbon, right? So it's kind of a dichotomy between the boreal forest and the temperate rainforests that we have.
In the black spruce, in that type of climate, like you said, the largest tree gets to be 12 inches in diameter, say, when most of them are smaller, but they still are a tall tree, which speaks to the tensile strength, right? And just the overall strength of this type of lumber, and how convenient or conducive is that for mass timber, like glulam production, CLT production. It becomes a great species for you guys to manufacture with.
It is. And when we talk about 12 inches, let's be clear, that's at the butt, right? I mean, you're not going to have a 12-inch black spruce. It just doesn't exist. You might get that in the balsam fir or the pine that is part of the peripheral species that we harvest. But black spruce, a couple of things. It's growing in peat bogs, very poor nutritionally, right? There's not a lot of nutrients there. So it's growing during the sunlight. They tend to get crowded together. And so those trees tend to delimb themselves as they're seeking sunlight. So you're getting, fallen branches, small pin knots, which is really one of the visual characteristics of black spruce. And because it grows in a I'm going to call it a radial fashion, black spruce tends to grow, and the growth rings have that spiral tension in it, as opposed to pine, which grows sequentially, where you're going to have knots every 1 foot or every 2 foot. So that in and of itself is one of the reasons where you have all that tensile strength, right? The wood is growing in a fashion that is just very unique. And because our growing time is only about 50 days, you get like super, super small, tight growth rings. And those growth rings really translate into fiber bending strength. So on average, we have probably 85% of our fiber is 1950 MSR or higher. So amazing. Nordic is again unique in that everything that we produce in our cross-laminated timber and our glulam is all predicated on that high fiber. We're the only one that produce E1 grade as our stock item and our sole product, right? So there's not really a visual grade like you have options with western species and southern yellow pine species that you can do that. With us, it's an E1 grade and that's it.
So talking carbon capture, reducing our carbon footprint, sustainable harvesting, you got 10 million acres with an 80-year life cycle on your tree, which means you get, by 80 years, you go through the full 10 million, and that first tree that you cut down is already back and ready to go again, right?
Actually, we part of the mandate that we have in order to be able to do forestry in northern Quebec is we have to guarantee by design a minimum of 10% greater growth within the volume of forest than what we're extracting. So we're actually increasing the yield over time, and that happens through a combination of, not just the harvesting itself, but also commercial pre-thinning. We're extracting non-viable items, but we're also leaving a patchwork quilt of different growth cycles. So in removing, I talked a little bit earlier about how the trees grow cheek to jowl next to each other. As we remove the mature wood, we have to leave the immature wood, and that will actually allow it to grow faster. So mandated and part of our part of the metrics that we are judged by is we have to make sure that we have more fiber growing than what we're harvesting. So it's actually a good scenario. There's no way that we are outstripping the land.
There's no, yeah, the volume required to actually outstrip that land would be unachievable.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're planting back 110% of the trees that you remove. So
Well, we're guaranteeing that growth. Some of it is through reforestation, but some of it is through the extraction process, right? So we can't impact riparian areas, and we are not allowed to impact more than 40% in any 25-year period. So our mandate is based on 25-year contracts. So we're always ensuring that there is a variety of growth cycles within the forest that we're harvesting.
very exciting. It's a good segue into how we actually met Jean-Marc, is on the poster child 11 East Lenox, Boston's first 7-story mass timber building. You are our mass timber partner in that project. It was a pleasure working with you. And it's really become like the blueprint for mass timber development within Boston. And I know there's a ton of, it might be the most visited site, I think, in Boston. It's definitely the most visited site in our portfolio. We are constantly giving tours. It's really beautiful to see the exposed mass timber. Could you tell us a little bit about the system, something Nordic brought to the table very early on when we're trying to build a 7-story apartment building and maintain it under the 70-foot Massachusetts high-rise designation?
Yeah, actually, the project that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I hinted at 11 East Lenox, was Arbora. And so this was a proof of concept that was developed by our design team with an architect that had a site in Montreal, which is, it's concrete is king in Montreal. And the area that this project was built in is surrounded by high-rise concrete multi-res. And so it was really with the intent to develop something that could compete with that, but also offer an alternative that was, visually striking, more environmentally sensitive, and performant. And that was going to allow us to maybe push the limits of multi-res construction in Canada. And again, this is before the code cycle allowed us to go that high. So, it was another area where we engaged early with the housing authorities, with the code officials and the fire departments to do that. And so this building, up until recently, and it may still be the largest area of mass timber development in one project, and at the time it was 12,000 cubic meters, so definitely the largest volume mass timber project in the world. And we used the same concept. So the idea was to be able to build a structure whose structural grid was adaptable to various types of apartments, including studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and even townhouses. And that's another area where cross-laminated timber allowed us to do things that couldn't be done with a monodirectional product. And so we actually have condo units that are 2-level with an opening and stairs going from one area to the other. But that concept was predicated on a 20-foot wide grid with a 20-foot base spacing from the corridor to the exterior column, but then cantilevering out. So we're taking advantage of cross-laminated timber's ability to span longer. The dual girder system allowed us to keep the height of the beams relatively shallow, and by haunching the column and putting notches on the column and then having those 2 girders applied to either side of the column, allowed us to be very economically prudent, if you will. So instead of having a lot of metal in there, now it becomes a bearing condition where the girders are sitting on wood, and now it's just a screwed connection, which is very inexpensive, very quick to extract. And as you know, in housing, dollar is king, right? So you've got to be able to do something that not only works structurally, but it has to be economically viable. So that became our proof of concept, and when it was introduced to the team at 11 East Lenox, it just made all the sense in the world.
Yeah, it made that development viable. It really did. Because we were able
Well,
to achieve 8 foot 10.5 clear height ceiling for the underside of plank, and we have
yes.
7 stories crammed under 70 feet. Like you can't do that with another system.
Well, I think, you guys aren't giving yourselves enough credit between you guys and the architect at MFDS and the client, just to engage and embrace as actively as you did was phenomenal. I mean, we do not typically see that kind of level of engagement, but you guys were all in, and it very much reminded me of Nordic's approach to providing solutions. Right, you guys were there. There was a willingness to engage and modify the concept to be able to accept that relatively rigid grid. And I think the beauty of it is the fact that you didn't look at that as a limitation. You actually looked at it as an opportunity, and that's the difference. That's the real distinction with working with this design team is embrace the challenge, move forward, and God, you guys really showed us something about how to move the AHJ, to get BPDA and BHA to agree to all this in the time that you did was absolutely stupendous. It was really a revelation to us. We didn't
Thank
think
you,
it could be
Jean-Marc.
done.
Well, we appreciate it, but like you said, Nordic operates very much the same way. There's a couple lanes we're going to go down from those comments, but one of which is like you got to embrace change, and like if you look at everything as an opportunity, you can find the opportunity in any situation, right? So we had a challenge here. We wanted to be sustainable, reduce our carbon footprint. It's a passive house development. IBC 2021 said that we could build this like by code, but Massachusetts hadn't yet adopted the building code. So Jean-Marc's referring there. A team at Code Red, Monty French Design Studio, Haycon, ourselves. We had to really get a direction for the development and how we're going to pitch this to the city to get the variances required to build a 7-story mass timber building ahead of that code adoption. And so what we did was we got a building permit under type 4 heavy timber, so that's up to 5 stories. We went in as that building type, and we asked for a variance on height, so an additional 2 stories above the 5. And our consolation for that was to achieve a 2-hour fire rating throughout the whole building. And the other one was a variance on concealed spaces, and we gave them non-combustible concealed spaces. So that's all your shafts. Those were going to be lined with gyp, so they were no combustible exposed area in those concealed spaces. And that really allowed us, and I give credit to Boston, really being, they're pro mass timber at the end of the day. They see the vision for the mass timber industry and the importance on reducing our carbon footprint. So they really supported the development at the end of the day and got comfortable. The double glulam beam is such a unique thought. It's like you don't usually think about, hey, how is it economical to put 2 beams right next to each other? And in this case, it made the most sense. We're trying to create a consistent column grid in mass timber, right? Because anytime you have to transfer a column, it becomes really challenging. Honestly, you're going to pay a premium in steel and concrete to create transfer beams. And it's really difficult to achieve with wood members, no matter how strong they are in a shallow floor-to-floor depth. So anything we can do to limit that. And the double glulam beams, what they allowed us to do is cantilever wood beams past a post while allowing the center of the column to be continuous to the next floor. So we were able to stack columns on top of each other, that allowed us to jog the exterior of the building and the corridor just by cantilevering beams beyond the column, which if we just tried to do one single beam, that was not achievable.
Exactly.
So it really opens up all of that opportunity. And then the 5-ply CLT, like you said, it has 2-way directional capacity, so it works more like a concrete flat plate. So we didn't even need beams in the other direction. Like the weak axis of the CLT spans across the entire corridor with no beam on either side. It's really a unique product, and it provided the room for the mechanical system to get into all of the units so that we could actually achieve that floor-to-floor height.
Right, and that really is part of the holistic idea of mass timber, and the reason it's so unique is you have to take all those considerations into account. you could obviously build it taller, right? But within the limitations of what the strictures of where we were going, if we didn't have that weak axis capability, running your mechanicals in the corridor would have been problematic. And so that weak axis without any beams was just a perfect moment, and this serendipitous scenario that allowed all of these various component pieces to actually play out and deliver the solution that you wanted. And it couldn't have been done if cross-laminated timber wasn't there, right? So
Totally agree.
Again, I just think the ability to embrace the vision and look beyond your level of experience internally for everyone, right, from the city all the way through the design people, was just really top shelf. And I got to throw an honorable mention out there, and more than an honorable mention, but Eli Gould, my colleague from the Quebec Wood Export Bureau, who introduced us and was versant with this and really made it all possible. So he's done a great job for us, and he's kind of like my right hand when it comes to helping us get our mission out there.
Eli is a great matchmaker, and my understanding of Eli's role at the Quebec Wood Export Bureau is there's so many people interested in mass timber that they could reach out for a development that really didn't make sense to be mass timber, right? So he kind of acts as the filter and identifies project teams or development opportunities that really have a good chance at advancing, at moving forward and being actually built with mass timber. Like, we don't want to just study buildings for mass timber that don't get built, right? The idea is to advance the entire industry and build buildings. And we, as a design and development team, all went down to a mass timber conference in New York City and met Eli. And that's where we met him and introduced him to everybody and talked to him about our plan. And he was the one that really gave us the opportunity to build a relationship with you and kind of guide us through those early times on how to plan the building, so that we showed that this was a viable concept to get buy-in. And that's really important.
Early in my career at Nordic Structures, I was the missionary. I was the one going to all these architectural seminars and presentations. I was crisscrossing the country just looking for anything that could possibly be converted to mass timber. Over time, obviously, there's been a huge appetite for more sustainable carbon negative construction, and it's still not a well-known system. So yeah, it's important for people to kind of grasp the concept and be willing to look non-traditional, right? You're not building this like you do steel and concrete, and even within the development community and the GC community, there's still a lot to learn. And so
it's a totally different process. Going back to the collaborative nature, you don't have a development and say, hey, we've already designed the building, can we build it out of mass timber? You go in saying, we want to build a sustainable carbon negative building. We want to develop with mass timber. And you're really bringing an entire design team and a mass timber partner in from day one. And that's going to increase your likelihood of successfully and economically building with mass timber, right?
Ideally, that would be the case. Unfortunately, we still see a lot of alternative designs where people are tire kicking. And again, because they're not considering the holistic approach to designing a building, they're trying to see if it pencils out, and you can't be half pregnant with mass timber, right? Nope. To your point, you have to look at it as a complete concept, and then in developing that, you may achieve some really great synergies that allow you to reduce costs elsewhere. The fact that you're building a passive house using mass timber, which has no thermal flywheel, actually it has a big thermal flywheel. It's an insulator, so unlike concrete and steel, you're not going to be heating up and cooling down as much. So during hot weather, it's going to mitigate that. During cold weather, it's going to mitigate that, and during that whole time frame, it's going to because of its hygroscopic properties, it's going to be less impactful on a moisture level. So your HVAC is going to be completely different in a mass timber structure than it is on a steel or a concrete building, But again, the community doesn't necessarily understand that dynamic, and so they may actually overbuild predicated on air movement as opposed to actual thermal and hygroscopic cycles. So there's a movement towards that. We still have a lot to learn, is my point. But the more we go, the more we find opportunities for cost reduction by utilizing mass timber, and so it doesn't become a one-for-one, right?
Yeah.
You're not just looking at the structure and the cost of those elements as a component.
So that's a good segue here into to wrap up the episode. I got a few questions I like to close every conversation out with. Is what are your bold predictions for mass timber in the next 5 to 10 years?
Bold?
Maybe they don't seem bold to you. They seem automatic, but I think to the world they might be bold.
Okay, well, I think you're going to see continued progressive logarithmic adoption of mass timber. Short term, you're going to see some supply side issues and design side issues, but the development of mass timber as a viable building system won't be questioned anymore. I think you're going to see 18-story is going to become kind of pedestrian, to be honest.
Pedestrian. So
I think it will become pedestrian. I mean, we have an extreme need for workforce housing in North America. I think the whole idea and the proof of concept that Lennox brought is the fact that you can build competitively. You can build for a market rate structure that would allow people that work in the city to actually live in the city, as opposed to commuting an hour and a half, 2 hours, because they just can't afford to live where they work. So I think you're going to see more of that. Listen, I think we've seen it commercially. The adoption of mass timber in commercial structures is, across North America, we're seeing all kinds of development companies doing that. The academic industry, right? All the universities are looking at mass timber. So adoption of carbon negative construction and the ability to draw down something that is sustainable and that grows free from sunlight is going to become more and more part of the daily conversation with regards to construction. And so embodied carbon is going to be the driver, and that's why I think you're going to see these limitations are not going to be limitations. I think that's going to be the jumping off point for us. I think the next point is going to be proof of concept. We're already talking to people that are developing hybrid systems that might allow us for concrete integration, maybe some spandrel beams with mass timber that's going to allow us to push into the ultra high rise type areas. I see that happening in the next 20, 30 years. But it's no longer going to be a proof of concept. I think that's going to be something that we're going to see, and it will no longer be viewed as an oddity.
Very exciting, very exciting. And so, closing questions here. So, top book or podcast that you've read in 2022?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I'm spending so much time promoting what we're doing. I'm not really doing a lot of reading, unfortunately.
Hey, that's okay.
It's one of the things that I miss. I'm going to have to get back to you on that one.
All right, we'll circle back. So,
actually, the top book that I've read in the past 2 years, I can tell you, a gentleman from Moscow.
Okay, Gentleman from Moscow. That's the title?
Gentleman from Moscow. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of it, but absolutely stupendous writing. The storyline is unique. It traces its origins back from Tsarist Russia, all the way through after the Second World War, through the eyes of one well-to-do gentleman that got caught up in the whole thing. But phenomenal book.
Very nice. Awesome. Well, thank you for that recommendation and advice for emerging leaders in development, design, and construction.
Embrace the change. I mean, this is something that the more open-minded you are, the more willing you are to engage, the better we can all become. And I will say one thing. One thing that really amazes me is the level of internal support within the community. There's very few CLT manufacturers in North America. There's more glulam manufacturers, but even within that community, there's a lot of internal support. We're all very aggressively championing the product. And while we may be competitors, we're all brothers in arms in developing this system. The fact that every manufacturer has a unique side to their production and to the product offerings that they have just means that you got to do a little bit more homework when you're choosing your partner. But don't be afraid to engage. I think the earlier you engage, the more successful your projects are going to be. And by engaging with solutions-based manufacturing, I think we can do a great job with mass timber moving forward.
I love that, Jean-Marc. Embrace change, be production or results oriented, right? Find a solution oriented. And I think generally just being curious when you go into these conversations. Don't act like you have all the answers. If you're hearing something new, lean into it and see what you can learn from the opportunity.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, Jean-Marc, I can't thank you enough for joining me today for the conversation. I hope we can do it again soon, especially as mass timber industry continues to develop. I can't thank you enough for your partnership in our developments and in those to come. For people that want to learn more about Nordic Structures or Jean-Marc or collaborate with you, maybe on LinkedIn or something, what's the best way for people to get in touch?
Well, I am available on LinkedIn. Nordic Structures website is nordic.ca, www.nordic.ca. We have absolutely just a tremendous design support staff and research team. Actually, we're working on a lot of stuff that I can't even begin to tell you what we're doing, but and not for NDA reasons. It's just that the breadth and scope of what we're doing is far beyond just building CLT panels. You can always reach out to me by phone. I'm sure you're going to put my contact information somewhere in the podcast.
Yeah, we're going to broadcast your phone number so you get all the direct calls. We'll put all your contact information, the website, LinkedIn, all that in the show notes. Jean-Marc, thanks so much. It's been great talking to you.
Look forward to our next project together, Rens.
Everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you so much for listening. If you found any value in this conversation, please like, share, and comment so we can get the word out to more people. It's the only way these communities grow. We're going to really change the industry. We're a growing community. Would love you to be a part of it. Please connect with us. We're going to be on all major social platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram. So all those links will be in the show notes. Enjoy the day.
They don't create real opportunities for their people, and then they wonder why good people leave. Well, we look at everybody's pay once a year, and we budgeted 3.5%. If you're really outstanding, Rens, you could get 5, and if you're really mediocre, you could get 2.5. No, that's not going to do it for good people.